Okay, let's do this. You know what time is it? What time it is? It's time to review episode of What If and just get it done with, so that I can just move on to other shows and movies, as you know. And you know which episode is I'm going to review in this video. That is none other than episode 6. And I have to say, just like the previous episodes, this episode was quite different from not just the Marvel movies, but even from other stories, other What If stories, and it worked actually because it was quite interesting how the story was written. First of all, they totally flipped the script with this episode, given that like they used the opening scene from Iron Man 1, the very first MCU movie, where Tony Stark is in Afghanistan and gets kidnapped. But instead, this time, when there's a scene in Iron Man 1 when like he's trying to escape, he's trying to call for help, but right when he calls for help, there's this missile from his own industry, Stark Industry, that attacks, that gets placed near him, and then once it blasts, he gets severely injured. That way he gets kidnapped, and rest is history, right? But in this episode, what happens is Eric Killmonger, the villain from Black Panther, he comes to rescue Tony Stark by lifting it with his bare hands and throws it away, and just to like impress Tony Stark and earn his trust. And it's interesting, what his intent was all along, which they dive into it throughout this whole episode, which I'm gonna get to just in a few seconds or minutes, I guess seconds. But first of all, I just didn't expect Killmonger and Tony Stark to get along with each other, because they two are like completely opposite characters from different backgrounds. Killmonger came from a poor neighborhood, whereas Tony Stark, came from a wealthy neighborhood. Killmonger, his physiques are better than Tony Stark's, I guess, and his character is completely different, as you must have seen in the movies. But then obviously both the actors, Michael B. Jordan and Robert Downey Jr., play their characters very well. There's no doubt about that. But Killmonger, it makes sense why Killmonger would be working with Tony Stark, given that they both are MIT alumni or alumnus. Because in Black Panther, there's a scene where Everett Ross, like mentions how he graduated from MIT, and at the same time, he also mentions how in Afghanistan he was sort of a killer. He killed many people, and if you remember those marks on his body, Killmonger's body, those are like the marks for to show how many people he killed, and most of the killing happened in Afghanistan. So they brilliantly used that part of his life, that particular period of time of his life, and put it in this episode, and it's actually worked. Like just brilliant. Marvelous work by Marvel, I guess. And speaking of marvelous, I think the way they portrayed his character, depicted Killmonger's character, was just brilliant. Just to show, just every single scene of him was perfectly written and showed, his character, his true character, without like it didn't feel very different from his previous, like from the Killmonger we know from Black Panther. It didn't seem like he didn't seem out of place or out of character. They used him very well, and his intent all along was to reach Wakanda, reach to the point where he becomes the king of Wakanda. And you know what? It was brilliant, like how he had it all set up. Basically, it was all part of his plan to work with Tony Stark, impress him, earn his trust, and then start, working along with him to create new innovations. And he uses those exact innovations against Wakanda to and it's interesting how he uses Stark's technology against Wakanda, not to attack them, but so he could help Wakanda attack Stark's robots, which he helped Tony Stark create using the help of Stark's technology. And it was interesting how he kills them, destroys those robots, so that way he can impress the Wakandans instead of Tony Stark, but then impress the Wakandans, and that way build the Wakandans' trust, so he can become the king. So basically, what happens? He first earns Tony Stark's trust, so that he could break his trust, and so that he could earn the trust of the Wakandans and the king of Wakanda, who was T'Chaka at that time. Speaking of Tony Stark, how he breaks Tony Stark's trust, which I was going to say in the middle, which is why kind of like I guess stuttered a bit, because I was planning to say it at that point of time, but I thought I'll just say it right after I finish saying that how he earned the trust of the Wakandans, after earning Tony Stark's trust and breaking it. So the reason why I say he broke Tony Stark's trust was simply because he was just being Killmonger by actually betraying Tony Stark and actually killing him. So just like in the movie Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark also had to die in this episode, and even in previous What If episodes. Like, I remember episode 3, how he gets killed. Oh boy, like you won't believe how many times Tony Stark gets killed in this episode. Just a callback to how he gets killed in Avengers Endgame. Just for this, I don't know whether it's really for that, but like really just to like call back Tony Stark's death. But it certainly is a callback, whether it is intentional or not. All his deaths in What If the episodes are all a callback to the scene in Avengers Endgame where he sacrifices his life. And that's really what this episode was about. I sort of summarized it. At the same time, I think I shared my opinion about Killmonger and how he was really well written, and really how his character was well used. And for a 30-minute episode, I think his character was used perfectly. And that's really what this show episode was all about, to show Killmonger's character. And you know what, he actually appears in future What If episodes and plays significant roles. He plays a significant role. So I'm going to be talking about that in the future videos. I also wanted to give a brief like just a brief information about how there were certain small details in the What If in this What If episode, which is episode 6, where like there's some scenes that that were really not really gonna be noticed by everyone, but it's really worth noticing them if you could, or if you really had the chance to watch this episode. If you haven't watched it yet, you might actually notice the fact that like Shuri, for example, this is just one example. There are also multiple other small details which I cannot really, I won't really go through in this video. I think you should probably find it for yourself when you watch the actual episode, or if you haven't watched it yet. But Shuri, she was actually a lot younger than she was in the movie, the Black Panther movie and the Avengers movies, and it actually makes sense given that like that time Killmonger, it was who was it? T'Chaka, or not T'Chaka? Oh, yeah, T'Chaka was the king, but T'Challa was a lot younger. So that way, like Shuri also was a lot younger, and that makes sense because it's 2008 when this when the story takes place. Given that this is the story from Iron Man 1, which was released in 2008. So obviously, Shuri was going to be a lot younger. And I'm actually impressed how Marvel actually paid to that small attention, like how Marvel paid attention to that detail, even though it wasn't really so significant to the story, but it was great that they still like managed to pay attention. So kudos to them, I guess, or not guess, but kudos to them indeed. Kudos to them. That's it. Sorry for saying I guess. It was a bit out of place, I think, but really, yeah, that's all I really had for this video, and for this episode. So until the future episodes, until the future reviews of the What If episodes, and future shows and movies, I'll see you next time.